Amidst the conflict between Palestine and Israel, this is a short letter consisting of 3 paragraphs written on the 2nd of November, 1917, by Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, to the head of the British Jewish community, Lionel Walter Rothschild. The British government likely had no idea that the conflict arising from this letter would continue for the next 100 years. Who is right and who is wrong in the Israel-Palestine conflict? What is the root of their dispute? And what role did the British government play in all of this? Welcome to Tales of the Past. This is one of the most controversial topics in the world, and I will try my best to remain completely neutral, discussing only facts and figures so that no one has any objections. Before World War I, there was no significant conflict in Palestine. The majority of the population was Muslim, but Jews and Christians also lived there peacefully. At that time, the entire region was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. As seen on this map, the Ottoman Empire stretched from Europe to northern Africa and covered a large portion of the Middle East. Some Arab leaders were unhappy under Ottoman rule and sought independence. To achieve this goal, they secretly allied with the British, who were enemies of the Ottomans. The British promised these Arab leaders that if they helped in the war against the Ottoman Empire, they would be granted their own independent country. At the same time, the British made a similar promise to the Jews in Europe, a community that historically had no permanent homeland and was always a minority wherever they lived. European Jews had already been facing severe hardships, discrimination, and even massacres in various places. But why were Jews targeted in Europe? The main reason was religious conflict. For centuries, Christians believed that Jews were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. This deep-rooted belief led to widespread intolerance towards Jews in Europe. The network of Jewish community, which is too strong globally, was the same at that time. They sought a separate homeland in Palestine under a movement known as Zionism. This movement was initiated in 1896 by Theodor Herzl, a Jewish political activist. He wrote a book, later translated into English as The Jewish State, in which he argued that European Jews could only live in peace if they had their own country in Palestine. Initially, many Jews opposed this idea, questioning why they should leave their homeland due to anti-Semitism. However, over time, Zionism gained political momentum. Jewish migration to Palestine increased, funded by wealthy members of the Jewish community. Financial support was provided for businesses and factories, encouraging settlement in Palestine. The British government also promised European Jews that they would be allowed to establish their own country in Palestine. Fast forward to 1917, during World War I, the Ottoman Empire was suffering heavy defeats. On November 2nd, 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter to Lionel Walter Rothschild, stating that the British government supported the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Rothschild was assured of full British support, along with a promise that the rights of existing Muslim inhabitants would not be harmed. Just a month after Balfour's letter, British soldiers arrived in Palestine, took control, and ended 400 years of Ottoman rule. But why was the British government so keen on giving Jews a separate country? The real reason was that the British wanted a future ally in the region after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. They promised Jews a homeland in exchange for their allegiance to Britain. Historically, victorious nations imposed their rule on defeated ones. After World War I, Britain took control of Palestine, attempted to establish a colony there, and ultimately succeeded. However, Palestinian Arabs, who had already been living there, believed that Britain had disregarded their right to self-determination. In 1919, Arthur Balfour wrote a memorandum stating that there was no need to seek the opinion of Palestinian Arabs regarding their future. Arabs viewed Britain's policies as favoring the Jews. This led to a wave of Jewish immigration to Palestine, with immigrants establishing schools, factories, and even a small army known as Haganah, with British approval. Palestinian Arabs felt increasingly marginalized as British authorities seemingly prioritized Jewish settlement over their own rights. They endured this situation for some time, but by 1939, they began to resist. However, under British rule, any opposition was seen as treason. Palestinian Arabs faced severe consequences. Many were arrested. Some leaders were exiled, and others were executed. Yet they continued their struggle. In response, the British government formed the Peel Commission to resolve the unrest. The commission proposed partitioning Palestine, but Palestinian Arabs rejected the idea, questioning why their land should be divided at all. Their protests continued until the British government released the White Paper in 1939, which rejected the Peel Commission's plan and limited Jewish immigration to Palestine. The White Paper also restricted Jewish land purchases and pledged to establish an independent Palestinian state within 10 years. For Zionists, this was a betrayal by Britain. This marked the beginning of the first major conflict between Jews and the British government. Zionists rejected the White Paper and launched attacks on British authorities in Palestine, resulting in casualties among both British officials and local Palestinians. These attacks continued for months. But then something even more significant happened: the outbreak of World War II in 1939. During the war, 60 million people lost their lives, including 6 million European Jews who were systematically exterminated in Hitler's death camps. This event became known as the Holocaust. Between 1941 and 1945, Hitler killed 66% of Europe's Jewish population. For the surviving Jews, Palestine was the only viable refuge, not only because it was a holy land for them, but also because a Jewish community already existed there. Despite British restrictions on Jewish immigration, survivors of the Holocaust migrated to Palestine in large numbers. However, Palestine itself was in turmoil. Zionists were still fighting the British over the White Paper. By the end of World War II, the British were exhausted and no longer had the strength to continue governing Palestine. In 1947, they decided to withdraw and handed over the issue to the United Nations. At that time, Palestine's population consisted of 630,000 Jews, 1,043,000 Christians, 1,081,000 Muslims. According to an Italian Jewish demographer, Sergio Della Pergola, the Muslim population was clearly double that of the Jews. Despite this, the UN proposed a partition plan, allocating 55% of Palestinian land to Jews. This proposal was passed with 72% of votes in the UN General Assembly, but no explanation was provided as to why only 30% of the population, Jews, were granted 55% of the land. India, under Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, opposed this decision and even alleged that Zionists had attempted to bribe India's UN ambassador to support their cause. The Arab nations rejected the UN resolution, leading to armed conflict between Jews and Palestinians. Since the Jewish military was far stronger, Palestinians were unable to resist effectively. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion officially declared the establishment of the State of Israel and became its first prime minister. Immediately after, 5 Arab countries declared war on Israel, seeing it as a Western-backed colonial imposition. This marked the first Arab-Israeli war. Despite being newly established, Israel, with strong Western support, defeated all 5 Arab nations. Following the war, Israel expanded its territory beyond what the UN had allocated. Over the years, conflicts continued, including the 1967 war, the creation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, peace talks, the rise of Hamas, and ongoing clashes. The struggle continues to this day. Hope you enjoyed the video.